is there anything specific?
It's DCA. DCA. Rejected DCA. I read it. Talking in San That's great. I'm really talking. That's what I thought. Yeah, well, yeah, it will.
Yeah, I see. Unless.
Got it. You want that TMI still?
Yeah, but really are. But I just gotta figure out a way to.
Sorry. Walk the right way there. But they're working on
Sorry.
Oh, I mean, yeah. Anywhere in Virginia.
Yeah, I've got. No, I don't have a slide.
He's in an area. So I'd like to do the real article management system.
We're
live.
Oh.
Yeah.
It's all right.
That's really good. So we're just doing your house in New York, so we can have release.
I work at, it's 4 o'clock, we're gonna get started, people are still filing in. I want to thank you everybody for coming to this year's edition of Collection Management Tools Roundtable. I think we've got a really good program today. I hope it generates a lot of good Q&A. Before we get to our 3 presentations, though, I've got some announcements, and I want to go over what the Roundtable has done over the past year. So, and normally in the beginning we have council liaison announcements, but that will occur at the end if there's time. Our liaison has a scheduling conflict for right now. So to get started, I want to announce and recognize the election winners from for our 2 open positions, which were Vice Chair, Chair-elect, and Web Liaison. And I guess I'll ask you to stand so people can see your face, please. The winner of Vice Chair, Chair-elect is Stephanie Bennett from Wake Forest University. And the Web Liaison is Carolyn Runyon from University of Tennessee, Chattanooga. Is she here? She's not here. Okay. I want to also recognize our 2 outgoing members of the steering committee. One is me, so I'm not going to stand up here and toot my own horn. Just to say that my term as chair is ending, and Jasmine Jones, who's up front here, will be filling in for chair, or just going into that position for next year. And sorry, Eric, if you're in the audience, I might mess this up. Eric Lewenkiewicz is our outgoing web liaison. And I want to recognize his work in particular with creating the documentation portal, which is something that we did last administration, and we continue to develop it this past year. He did a lot of work with that, and I'm very thankful for him. Our continuing steering committee members are Martha O'Hara Conway, Daniel Weddington, and Caitlin Wells. So they'll be in their positions for 1 more year. Okay, those are the announcements. And I'd like to continue with a year in review of what we've done as a roundtable. When we were planning in the early months of the post SAA, we were brainstorming ideas of what to do for this coming year. And one idea we had was resurrecting an old, I don't know if I'd call it an initiative, but something that we found on the microsite called repository profiles. And what those were years ago at Archivist Toolkit and Archon Renew, several people came up here and gave presentations about early implementation of those tools. And we thought, well, why don't we try to do that with archive space as well? Create a repository profile for anybody who wanted to answer a set of questions and be highlighted on our microsite as an early implementer of archive space and answer several questions about the implementation process. So we drafted some questions, and the questions were about planning, challenges to implementation, integrations with other systems, and how archive space has been an improvement over your previous workflow or previous tool, or what kind of impact it's had at your institution. And I guess the purpose of that was to really see, so people could see what others are doing with archive space and how things are going. We issued several calls, at least 2 calls on the listservs for volunteers, and we had a small response. Only 2 were interested, and we got 1 official submission for the archive space repository profile. But I see this as really an ongoing thing. It's very casual. If anybody wants to participate, you can contact the steering committee and take it from there. So, and these repository profiles I found interesting that Google Analytics actually tracks our microsite. And between August of 2015 and May of this year, it had 551 page views, which was way more than I would have ever imagined. So it is getting, people are stumbling across it. The second thing we did was continuing the development of the documentation portal. Now, most of you probably know what that is. We publicized it a lot last year and then again this year at different times. If you're not familiar with what I'm talking about, documentation portal was something that was an idea among the Roundtable membership that we would create a space on the microsite for institutions to submit homegrown, in-house created documentation on how to use their collection management tools, so that we can collect those in one place, be a free, helpful resource for anybody struggling to use a collection management tool. So we wanted to continue to develop that. Now, Eric had, some of the enhancements we made to the documentation portal was one that Eric took the submissions off of Google Drive and put them right on the microsite, so you don't get linked back to Google Drive, which is where they had been stored. He also wrote a submission guideline that's right on the page, documentation portal page, where now you're instructed to email the web liaison directly rather than submit to Google Drive. And we issued a couple more rounds of calls for submissions, and we got a pretty low response compared to what we did the first time around. Perhaps I said maybe the well is drying up, but in total now we have 25 manuals on the portal that cover Archive Space, Archivist Toolkit, Archon, Quadra, SKCA, Oral History Metadata Synchronizer, and Past Perfect. And I want to thank everybody who has submitted their documentation. One area of improvement that I think is lacking is our manuals or instructions on synchronizing or integrating different tools to work together and how that's going on. So that's one area where we are, it could grow in that area. So those were our two main initiatives over the year. And I would like to share with you some Google Analytics about the portal to show you that it's been a pretty good, worthwhile effort so far. Google Analytics does track our microsite. It's kind of hard to get the data though because we don't have direct access to it. We have to go through Matt Black, so you have to communicate to him what you want, and it's not as effective as just logging in and getting to play with all the tools yourself. I am by no means a web analytics expert, so I just wanted to share some general information with you about portal usage. We looked at a period of August 1st, 2015 through May 31st, 2016. So really the last year since last SAA, practically. That's the range for what our data I'll be talking about. But I have received some anecdotal evidence in phone calls or just socializing with people that they have used the portal and they appreciate it, and especially the Archive Space manuals are particularly helpful. So to get into some detail for the Google Analytics, I kind of just broke it down into 3 questions. The first one was, how often are these pages being accessed, and I guess for how long? So we're looking at page views, and Archive Space came in the top with 2,019 page views and an average duration of 3 minutes and 26 seconds per visit. The portal homepage was 1,752 page views with a duration of 16 seconds. Archivist Toolkit had 588 views. Past Perfect, 375. Quadra was 141. Archon 132, and the oral history metadata synchronizer was 29. I was pleased, again, perhaps this is my ignorance showing because I'm not a web analytics expert, but I thought the durations were on the high side for a web page. So to me, it showed that people are engaging, clicking around, and really taking their time to look at these pages. The second thing I was interested in is where are people actually coming from? And there are some interesting countries. The portal homepage, the landing page, before you get into the individual tool pages, reported 805 sessions of use. The United States, of course, dominated. We also had 41 sessions from Canada, 24 from Barbados, 14 from Australia, 3 from Venezuela. Those were the top ones. Within the United States, California, New York, Illinois, Pennsylvania, and Kentucky were the biggest users. Going down to the individual tools, for archive space, United States, of course, was at the top, but we also had users from Australia, Puerto Rico, and Portugal. Archivist Toolkit had users from Trinidad and Tobago, interestingly, 14, United Kingdom and New Zealand, Archon, all from the United States, Quadra, all United States, and Past Perfect had Netherlands and Puerto Rico as well as the United States. So it gives you an idea of different countries stumbling across the portal. And then lastly, was I was wondering, how did people get there, get to the portal? And interestingly, across the board, with the exception of the home page, people are getting to the tool pages that have the actual manuals through organic open web searches. So they're able to get there just by typing in some phrase into a search engine and they're coming across it, which I was pleased with that. The portal homepage was the only one that was a direct URL. That's how they got there. But overall, overwhelmingly, people are going through the organic Google search. And another thing I wanted to point out was it appears to me that the portal is being integrated to some degree into library science programs or within libraries, it's being treated as a resource within academic libraries because we get referrals to the portal homepage, at least from places like mls.umd.edu, libguides.bc.edu, bblearn.utk.edu are all referring people to the portal, so that's nice to see. I guess perhaps it's being seen as a resource for directing people toward maybe a library science program or from a LibGuide in a university. So that concludes our year in review and some data on the portal usage. I think archive space is far and away archive space is the most popular thing on the portal. I think it's because it's new, there's a curiosity, and people are seeking low-cost help. So that concludes our year in review. Are there any questions about anything that I've talked about so far? All right. We're going to start now with our presentations, and I think I clicked the button by accident.
So just to back up slightly, I'm Mariah Boyd from the Ohio State University Libraries, where I'm the head of special collections, description, and access. And I'm going to be telling you the story of our struggles with some archival management systems over the last couple of years. So to get there, I'm going to just kind of go over the context that I'm talking about. I'm going to tell you about how we selected archive space. We went through a phase of implementation, and we ultimately decided to suspend that implementation. I'll discuss our current strategy using Archivist Toolkit, and then sort of offer my suggestions for how the things that we learned that might help you all, and my suggestions for how, as a community, we could perhaps advance in this area. I do want to be clear that this was the experience that we had at OSU, but this is not necessarily the experience that other people had. I'm going to talk about a couple of specific problems with archive space that have apparently been resolved at this time, so that is great. Some of the things I'm going to say are my opinion and not that of the university or my colleagues. So to start out, I would say the OSU libraries made a decision to really centralize archival processing in technical services. And to advance that program, we started by hiring a coordinator and really looking at what we had been doing before. So each collection was responsible for doing their own processing. That was really a curatorial responsibility. And we uncovered a plethora of tools and practices all over the place. Even within the same unit, things have been done multiple ways. And of course, we're talking about a 40+ year history here. So over time too, we just have a lot of different things to deal with. So just within our structure, and this is our structure today, not as it was at the time, it might be also important to realize that my unit is Special Collections Description and Access, which is in the little purple bar here. So we also just had a name change. Our divisions now, Content and Access, because it's much shorter than Collections, Technical Services, and Scholarly Communication. We report in the same line as other traditional technical services functions. And then you'll notice that we're kind of in the orangey color. That's the division that's Special Collections and Area Studies. And you'll notice that we have 7 major collecting departments within our library system. And there's a little bit of sort of substructure to that in that we have 3 collections that are in our main library. And that's actually where a lot of our phase of our activity was. The other units, we have 3 archival collections: University Archives, the Ohio Congressional Archives, and the Bird Polar Archives that are also in the same physical location. So because of sort of how they're grouped physically, that also has impacted some of the approaches to managing those collections and the work that we have been doing. Also sort of concurrently with that, we did move 20,000 cubic feet of material offsite to an offsite storage facility, which did require quite a lot of work to get them under physical and intellectual control in order to do it. So we really had a lot going on that really highlighted that we needed to know. As I always say, we need to have the answer to 2 questions. What do we have and where is it? And unfortunately, the answer to those questions can be a lot harder to find than you would really hope. So in addition to all of that, we also were really going through a major change in the IT environment in our library system as well. So Terry Reese, who's kind of famous, so he was appointed as head of digital initiatives and really was tasked with building a whole new digital infrastructure for our libraries. And so as part of that, we did examine special collections materials in particular. We held a retreat, and I think everybody agreed that discovery of special collections is not what we want it to be. We explored all these different practices, tools, systems, and so forth, and really sort of began the brainstorming then of what are the functional requirements that we're really looking for in the system of our dreams, so to speak. So that then led to a task force that defined functional requirements, did some product evaluation, kind of identified the opportunities as well as the challenges, and that report did recommend the implementation of archive space. So we're pretty excited about it at that time. Ooh, sorry, I really jumped ahead there. It's not my laptop. Yes, sorry. So, of course, the major goal was consolidating the practices and archival metadata for all of the OSU special collections in one place. And we identified archive space as best meeting the criteria for our digital initiatives program guiding principles. And I've sort of highlighted some of those that led us to identify archive space as the best solution here. So we are really focused that we are here to provide services. We're not here to build archival management system from the ground up, right? So then we're going to decide if we want to build, buy, or borrow, which is really within this that's saying that we prefer open source systems whenever possible. We're really looking at modular services so we can switch components in and out as we need to. We realize there's change. We really have embraced working with partners in a way that our IT strategy had not been before. So again, that investment in the open source community. And the last two, we're all in the real world and we want to do things following standards. So when these are posted, you can go to the full report to see them all. So all of these really led us to believe archive space is the answer for us. So we love task forces at my library, may at yours too. Another task force, guess what? I got to be on all of these task forces that kind of spent the summer planning our implementation. So a big component here was inventorying all the sources for data migration. And we found a lot. And then as we've continued on, we have found more. Some people will be like, oh, well, you can't find that there because that's on our film database. We're like, film database? Remember when we asked you to identify all the sources? That should have been on that list, but okay, that's okay. Sorry, Tamar. You were here. They have film database, yes. So we had past perfect. We had finding aids and inventories in probably literally all formats. Spreadsheets, databases, we had it all. So we also went through very systematically through archive space. We're doing configuration. We immediately identified some local customization that we thought would be great, and that was easily done. Our developers were like, yeah, we could see why auto-incrementing accession numbers would be really helpful. They developed that went smoothly. We're like, yay, this is great. And so then we did put in a proposal to get training from lyricists and started kind of playing with the system. So implementation really ramped up then the fall of September 2014 when we did get 2 days of training with lyricists. And then here's where the foreshadowing starts. So at that training, we were like, hey, we noticed that some things aren't staying in the order that they were put into the system. And they were like, oh, it's okay. No problem, developers are working on it. We're, okay, good. So we then implemented we had a working group this time. Working groups are different than task forces in my library. And really started going into the production phase. So new data entry began for sessions and new finding aids, and we started thinking about migrating our existing data. I'd say that we really tried our best to join the community, learn about archive space. We had somebody serving on the technical advisory, I think this is a council, sorry, and somebody from my library also on the public interface enhancement project, and our developers were formally accepted for a code contribution following a lengthy discussion with our legal department. So we thought things were going well. We were excited, really investing in the community, but as those months started to tick by, we realized that there were some problems. We were having extremely serious system performance problems. So some of you may remember the blue screens of death. We had white screens of death with archive space. So you would do something, white screen, and you would maybe sit there for 5 minutes or so. And probably related to that, we had some data that just kind of disappeared. So that wasn't great. We were a little bit unsure about what was going on there. The other thing that really came up was we had been anticipating the migration tools would be available, but because of really the plethora of our data sources and oddities within them, those tools were not going to work for us. And so we were going to need local developer time to do it. So we did have a meeting with the lyricist developer working on migration tools, and they actually recommended to us, this is the next piece of foreshadowing, that we consider using ArcVis Toolkit as a migration tool. So migrate information into ArcVis Toolkit and then into archive space. So in December of 2014, we thought that was a really stupid idea. We're like, that's silly. Why would we implement one system just to migrate our data when really we want to be in a different system? That seems like a step that we don't want to take. So And then it also turned out that we had been really also anticipating that archive space was basically ready to go off the shelf, and we discovered that really our IT was spending all of their allocated time for archive space just keeping the system running and not doing the enhancements that we had sort of anticipated using our developer time for. So that wasn't great, but then sort of really starting in the spring of 2015, that's when the data resequencing problem popped up in our archive space instance. So this is where components would just move themselves around. So, and order is kind of the reason that we're doing this. So, so this was really, really troubling for us that components would be in one place, then the next time you open the resource record, they would have moved around. And we couldn't determine what the pattern was to this behavior either. And so that was unfortunate. All right, I'm being attacked. Yes. Didn't touch anything. And then we also had 2 instances of people accidentally deleting an entire resource record. One of these cases is very sad because it was a practicum student who had spent like most of her 100+ hours working on the binding aid for a collection, and it just disappeared. So that was really sad. We were able to recover it. It took about 40 hours of developer time. And so when it happened the second time, we're like, that one we had a more recent backup because we had been sort of copying over into our staging environment pretty regularly. So we're like, well, that one we can just copy back over from staging. So again, that was not great, not something that we were looking for in our full collection management system. Probably the other thing though that really, so those were somewhat unusual situations. It did turn out ultimately that really that was a system latency issue because you would highlight a component and delete it. Then it would look like in the user interface you had highlighted another component and deleted that, but in fact it hadn't finished the first delete, so then it popped up and highlighted the top level, and then when you deleted, the whole resource record had gone. But that was not what it looked like in the user interface. So in a way, it was like it had done exactly what you told it to. You just hadn't told it the thing that you thought you wanted to, so that wasn't good. But really, at this point, staff were doing workarounds to not use the system. And the whole goal of this was to get everybody to use the same system. And just people were just really frustrated. So we convened a meeting of all the stakeholders, and so we're like, okay, we can fix these problems. So IT developed an internal response plan, and then really we started working a lot more closely with Lyricus as well, because there had been some discussion about, well, maybe this is our local configuration and it's not really an archive space problem, or we aren't hearing about this from other users, so why are we having these problems and apparently nobody else is. But in the summer, we learned it wasn't just us, right? So I think just because of the way that we did our implementation, we were a little bit ahead of other folks who've been concentrating on migration, but we started doing new work right away. So we're really building up a corpus of data right there in archive space. And again, we've really joined with other institutions in conveying them. And certainly, Lyricus took these very seriously and rushed out releases to try to fix the problems, but usually they didn't, and sometimes they introduced new problems. So, so that was kind of that situation. And I just want to also be clear, it was also our fault. So we also were contributing to this. Like I said, our IT resources were kind of stretched anyway, and over the course of this project, 3 developers, or no, we put it, 75% of our developers left. So we really only had 1 developer. This was not his area of expertise. So because of that, we hadn't really been able to address legacy data issues at all. And we just really hadn't made the progress we wanted. I do want to say that there was one thing that was really cool, which was we scanned paper inventories, contracted work with Backstage to encode them, and loaded them into the archive space. That was great. So that was good. And that really has ultimately led to where we are now, which is we've published sort of preliminary finding aids for hundreds of university archives collections. That previously the only way that you could use those collections was by coming to the reading room and looking at binders. So that's great. So kind of our turning point was that summer, and actually kind of specifically around the time of SAA in Cleveland. So there had been a developer at Lyrasis who was working on migration projects, and they announced that his current contract would end and they wouldn't be continuing that. We met with several archive space users at SAA who sort of reported successful implementation, and we kind of talked to them, and their success was success for them, but it wouldn't have met our criteria for success, and that they were like, well, yeah, that does happen, but we can live with it. We're like, well, that happens to us and we can't live with it. Another critical point was when several of our IT staff actually came and sat and observed our students and our staff doing the day-to-day work, and they're like, okay, now we see what you're complaining about. And then we actually did some head-to-head testing of Archivist Toolkit and Archive Space, and sort of the one that stands out to me is, so we tried ingesting an existing EAD record into each system. In AT, it loaded in, I think, 6.4 seconds. In Archive Space, 24 hours later, we got a message that it had failed. So we didn't really know why it had failed. So, and I would say this is an area where I hear Archive Space is much, much better now. So I'm not saying that Archive Space is lost cause at all, but for us, we were in a place where we couldn't invest in figuring that out. So in September, we did decide to suspend our Archive Space implementation and switch over to Archivist Toolkit instead. So here I'm quoting for our internal report for the reasons that we cited for making that decision. So at that time, we could not effectively manage data in Archive Space because it might disappear or move without us doing anything to it. We weren't able to ascertain what the timelines were for solutions to be put forth. And they actually turned out to be pretty shortly thereafter, from what I understand. We also really knew that this work on migration tools was just not going to happen. So we went with the Archivist Toolkit, partly because of that recommendation to use it. We really felt like it would provide us with a stable workspace to kind of gather up and normalize all of our currently scattered data. And then we did feel like we would be able to provide public access, because also at that time we had determined that the public interface to Archive Space was not especially satisfactory, and again, the timeline, they were working on new public interface, which we'll get to hear about later, but that timeline, at the time we said at least 6 months and more likely a year away from release. So here we are a year later, it is not yet released, so, but it's going to be, and it's cool. So, so that's why we really decided that in our situation, this was the way to go. So I'll also say we had never implemented Archivist Toolkit at our libraries before. So we're in a different situation than other folks I know about who are like, well, we're going to keep using Archivist Toolkit for now. So we really view it as an interim solution with sort of the job of data normalization and consolidation. It's currently pretty stable with a low maintenance burden, but clearly there are some drawbacks. So it doesn't have an integrated public interface, and it's not at all a long-term technical solution for us. So we do anticipate doing a re-examination of our functional requirements and the tools that are in the marketplace when we're kind of further on in the state of migration progress. So people always ask me, well, what does your IT think about Archivist Toolkit? First of all, they're really happy that we're stable, because they were also unhappy during the period of instability, and we got to be really excellent partners with them, which is another positive out of this experience. So they're happy that we're not complaining anymore. And they're also pretty comfortable with all of the underlying technology under Archivist Toolkit. So SQL, Java, that's all stuff that they know. Their really main concern is about maintaining Java version compatibility especially because we also have to use Java with our ILS. So like if they ever start fighting with each other, then we're going to have a problem. They certainly do not prefer client-server architecture at all, and that hasn't yet come up on the security audits, but I'm expecting that could happen someday soon, and it's just not in alignment with their vision of open, interoperable systems. So I think some of the main things that we've learned is we should have been a lot more rigorous about our product selection and gathering information from other users before we selected the product. We also sort of realized that our functional requirements, while they're all things we wanted, were very abstract. So it's kind of, we should have been much more detailed. We really determined that archive space is maturing, but managing sort of that process along with our complex local data was really more than we had the resources to do. I think we've also learned this is just going to take a lot longer than we hoped, no matter what. And as I said at the beginning too, we followed standards all along, we probably wouldn't have been in quite as much of a mess as we are now. So where are we now? We're really planning to spend at least probably the next year, maybe two, on data migration and normalization. We're publishing finding aids from AT to our web pages. There's an interesting corollary activity, which I think sort of goes to my next points. We have an artifact management task force that's also looking at how we are describing and managing individually managed objects in our collections. So for example, our Billy Ireland Cartoon Library Museum has a couple of 100,000 individually described works of art that are not managed archivally. So how does that relate? And of course, we're very pleased to hear about significant progress on archive space. Internally as well, our own IT environment is maturing, staffing situation is more stable, so that's all great, but we have several other major initiatives that are taking up their time, which means that we don't really have access to significant IT resources right now, even if we say we were like, we're ready to go back to archive space next month, they wouldn't have the capacity to take on that project. So speaking with some of you and other colleagues, I would say archive space has certainly been successful for people. I think it depends on sort of the complexity and expectations that they had going into it, to some degree the hosting situation, and then the resources that they might have. If you have the resources for internal developers to maybe have the budget to contract some of that work out, you probably would be perfectly happy with archive space. And maybe you would have more, depending on your sort of organizational culture, more ability to kind of be flexible and adjust to some of these challenges. I've definitely heard that information is hard to get, not only before you're a member, but before training. And so I think really getting more information out there would be great. And certainly other institutions, including our colleagues at Yale, for example, have really advanced archive space significantly, so we all should be grateful to them. So as I think about how we should move forward within the archive space community, I think we have to recognize that Lyrasis has limited developer capacity. So they did have a full-time developer who left in the spring, and the hours that were available for public interface development were also reduced. So they're currently hiring a developer, and that's great, but we really have to pull the resources to advance this all together. And that is something that my colleague Terry Reese worked on when he was on the Technical Advisory Council, was really that, all of the members, or many of the members, do have resources, but we have to coordinate that. So I would think that the real value proposition of Lyrasis membership is around that coordination, which I understand is difficult, because if it were easy, we wouldn't need them, right? So it is difficult, but I think that is really where the effort should be. And of course, information sharing, hopefully having realistic discussions like the one I just put forth, and that lessons learned should be lessons shared. From the profession, I think we have some sort of inherent tension here, but we have to recognize that it's really unlikely that one solution is going to work for absolutely everybody. So archive space is probably not everybody's ultimate choice, but if we really focused our efforts on standards and best practices, and then holding our systems to compliance with those, we would all be in a much better position to have tools and use tools and switch between tools according to our workflows. The other thing is it can be difficult within our own institutions, let alone as a profession, but we really have to advocate for getting the systems that do meet our needs and not settling for something that's okay, but we really need something, and part of that is being able to make this case. So that goes back to being able to articulate as an association, as a profession, what it is that we do and how systems can support that work. And really, and although we have to also realize it can't happen all at once. And I think what we're really looking at, hopefully by focusing rather on the tools, but on the functions that we require, that we can really look forward to a future of many integrated, interoperable systems that have components that can kind of switch in and out as we have articulated in our digital library principles. So as I mentioned, we have an art and artifact management task force. And what we're really seeing with that is, we have some components, like donor management has always been identified for us as an area that we wanted to develop in archive space. But really, that's an activity that crosses all of our materials, regardless of the kind of control they are, bibliographic, archival, or museum. So what about if we had a magic system where that happened centrally, and the description lived in a system that was appropriate for it? And yet there's also a really transparent way for the researchers to identify those materials, because that is what we're actually here for, right? So again, I think we have many tools available. Some of them will work better for other people than others, but we're all really trying to do the same thing. So I think that's all I have to say.
We're going to save questions for everybody until the end. And it is me again. I'm going to talk about an Archon update project that I and all those listed on that slide have been participating in over the last about 6 months or so. I want to start off by saying that I was not originally the presenter of this, but the ones who were could not be here today. So I'm going to do the best I can. My slideshow also is very quite casual, so this is rather just an informal informational presentation. For about the last 6 months, a group of us on the slide, all Archon users, pooled some money together to pay library hosts to update Archon. The purpose of the project was to update Archon's PHP code so that it works under the current version of PHP, and to explore and address some security issues that are present in the software, with the ultimate goal of making Archon a viable collection management tool into the future for a little bit while longer. Not permanently, but for a little bit while longer. This talk is about this specific project. Future concerns about the future of Archon I'll try to address briefly at the very end. So many people have moved from Archivist Toolkit and Archive to ArchSpace, a lot of Archon users have stayed with Archon because of its ease of use and features. But there are some serious, or have been some serious concerns about the software because the official development ceased in 2012. The updates since then have been focused exclusively on migration to ArchiveSpace. Archon was last developed under PHP 5.3.29, and PHP is currently in version 7. Using Archon in PHP 5.4, there are errors and complications. And if you go to Archon's website, They have a public discussion forum. You can find more information there about the specific curves. PHP, the project, no longer supports version 5.3 or 5.4. So running Archon now is a very unstable, increasingly fragile environment that's not supported and costly as time goes on too. So those of us interested in keeping Archon going, as I said, are listed on the slide. Sasha was our main leader in this project. Caitlin Nelson led the programming initiative at Library Host. I asked the group, and generally, why do you even want to do this project in the first place? And the general consensus was that they like Archon's ease of use, not only for staff, but it's so easy to train students on as well. They like the importing legacy finding aids through batch CSV importing. They really like how Archon emphasizes the access for the public end rather than an administrative end, where finding aids are the priority. And some of the group have done a lot of in-house modifications to Archon that they wanted to keep going. Cost is also a major one. It's a free open source tool. And lastly, Archon was created to be simple for small shops that that have little IT support or expertise. So it's ideal. And that's really one of the main points of this presentation, is that this is about finding the tool that works best for your institution, your situation. And all of us got together and felt it'd be worthwhile to fix Archon and make it a more viable tool into the future. Go to the next slide. Next slide. Oops. Am I here yet? Prison installation. Why am I having so much trouble with video? Okay, you're on. No, I apologize, folks.
Now you're on project status.
Oh. Okay, here's where I'm supposed to be. So again, to reiterate the specific goals, update Archon's PHP to work in version 5.6.x and address security issues. In January, Library Host sent us their proposal, and we decided, or they recommended to only go from 5.3 to version 5.6 because to leap all the way up to PHP 7 would be too costly and risky and time consuming. So that's why we went with the 5.6. And their original proposal had 3 phases, and after discussion we decided to only pursue phase 1, which again was PHP upgrade, conducting a preliminary security audit of Archon, and testing Archon working behind the shield of a web application firewall to help beef up its security. All the project partners signed an MOU that to sort of solidify our partnership. It outlined the roles of everybody, and then we went to work. So as Library Host was updating the PHP, they also performed a security audit to identify just some low-hanging issues, as they put it, making a list of Archon security vulnerabilities. The main issues that they reported back to us had to do with cross-site scripting, command execution, and cookies not set to HTTP only. At the same time, they were also testing Archon, using Archon with mod security, which is a web application firewall. And it's really, what they found was that if you use mod security with Archon, it will address several of the issues that they found in the security audit. So it is an improvement. That's really just a stopgap measure though. And I have to emphasize that if you're using Archon or want to use the new updated Archon without the firewall, that's totally okay. It's not any less secure than anything you've been using now. It's just an extra layer security. Our group met through conference calls periodically. Weeks 3, 6, and 10, we scheduled them. And then we communicated through email for some Q&A with Caitlin, that library host. And then by about June, we began to test it, test what they had completed. The testing we did in 2 phases. First, library host hosted a empty Archon, and we signed up for time slots, and we would go in during those time slots and test an aspect of Archon that, such as the creator manager, the collection manager, subjects manager, and so forth. And we would click around on every button, every menu. We would create content. And while this was happening, we would record in detail any errors that were coming up that we encountered. And I believe our actions were being recorded in the background for library host developers to look at as well. Secondly, once that was done, then we took the Archon and tried to install it locally, importing a copy of our production database, so and to see and for further testing, see if we got any errors. We remain in testing mode. Our goal was to have everything finished by today. It's not finished yet. I should have gone to the next slide. Yeah, here. There we go. It's a real casual slideshow. Like I so our goal was to, the real challenge is that what's on there is not what's on the screen, and I get confused. Yeah, so regrettably, it's not done yet, but I'll talk more about that in a minute. Because we really wanted to factor in more time for testing. That's the main reason it's not done yet. So 2 lessons learned before I give some concluding remarks. Number 1, from the very beginning, we did not factor in enough time for testing and did not realize how long that would actually take. Secondly, a lesson learned, I guess more for library hosts, is that they underestimated the amount of time that they would put in the project. They originally estimated 85 hours, but since last time I saw, I've spent 150 and going up. So very thankful for all their work. So for some concluding remarks, jeez, there we go. Where are we now? We remain in testing mode. And some of the library host developers think we're pretty close to being done, but there are a couple things that we need to talk about as a group. And this all occurred very recently, where they said, well, wait a minute, like on Monday I got word, wait a minute, we're still gonna test. So it kind of came as a late surprise to me. So where and when can you download it? Well, it's gonna be available in the Archon GitHub site, but it's not there yet because it's not finished. Also, what I said about mod security, the web application firewall, library host wrote up a detailed instruction on how to get those things working together, which will be, I assume, available in the same spot. When it is ready, we're going to publicize it via email, probably the collection management tool Roundtable list, of course, when it's ready to go. You might be wondering, will this break anything you currently have? No, it shouldn't. But you might, if you did a lot of custom coding, it might give you some issues that you might need to rewrite your custom code into version of PHP 5.6. If you have any errors or problems, you can, as currently, there's an issues spot on the Archon GitHub that you can report your problems to. How long does this actually extend Archon's life as a viable tool? Well, version 5.6 has active support through the end of this year, 2016, security support through 2018. And how does this affect archive space migration? If you want to go on to that, it shouldn't, because the migration tool looks at the database rather than the Archon code. And then what about the future? The project team hasn't thought a whole lot about how to go on. Right now, beyond this, there's no plans or discussion on what to do next or any further updates. We have talked about having kind of an informal and unconference at Berea, or I'm sorry, at Denison, where Sasha works in the spring of 17 to get together, maybe talk about these things. But there's not a whole lot concrete I can say about the future other than we haven't talked about it a whole lot. And beyond this specific project, there's no further plans to update ARCON any more than that. So that concludes my presentation.
Take a look once in a while. Thank you. That was very helpful with us. Hello, welcome. Thanks for having us. Matt asked Mark and I to go last because he thought you would be the most uplifting presentation. Despite that, somehow Mark and I have decided to be anonymous in our presentation, but I am Susan Kaczynski from Harvard University, and this is Mark Kessler from Yale University, and we're here to talk about archive space and give a brief public user interface update for you all. Yeah, arrow key, sir.
You hit the right key, the right direction, or down.
Really? Okay, great, thank you. I'll just have him switch my slide every time too, so that's why there's two of us up here. We can come into each other. I am sure most of you saw Mark sent out an email last week with that update about the public user interface and gave you some information. And our goal was not to just regurgitate the email, but assume you've read that and just give a little more in-depth about what's going on. That said, we bookmarked our presentation with a link to the wiki, and we really want to encourage people to look at the wiki and really think about bookmark it, check it regularly, because that is where we're going to try our best to keep everything very much up to date and keep you informed of it. So we highly recommend, a weekly check-in, or at least bi-weekly. That said, the wiki covers the design phase, the development phase, and the release phase. And I'm going to talk very briefly about the design phase, and then Mark is going to talk about the development and the release phase and do what might be a live demo, but probably won't be a live demo. Since we kind of even seem to do the slideshow. The design phase ran from July through December 2015. It involved both the Cherry Hill company that Archive Space contracted with, and they're a firm that does a lot of library and web design, and a group of archivists. There were about 16 of us from academic, historical, and corporate archives. We met virtually every 2 weeks. Mark was the lead of the project and kept us going. We had homework in between during that time. Some of the things we worked on was user personas was the first thing, because we really wanted to think about who were we designing for, what was the purpose of this interface, to give us a basic understanding of what were our goals, who was going to use this public user interface, We came up with 8 personas. They're listed there for you, including academic, staff such as archivists and librarians, researchers who are doing research for their job, undergraduates, graduate students, etc. You're gonna have to do my slide. It's very disconcerting because I can't actually see. That's okay. Thank you, that's sure. After we did use personas, what we did was some usability testing. And we tested on various personas such as student, archivist, researcher, etc. And the testers were at Rice, at Yale, and Harvard. And we tested them on the current interface of ArchivesSpace, which made it quite interesting, I think, what the responses we got. The people were filmed, and we with the Cherry Hill company really went over both the scripts and the responses and came up with a lot of recommendations based on that. So what were the outcomes of all of our work? Well, some of it was that we developed a set of wireframes, about 20 of them, for various displays. Those are all available on the wiki. And a final report of design recommendations that broke down into about 4 areas. Browse and find, which is basically the search functionality, the browse functionality, what do you expect when you type in a search? What kind of search do you want? One of the things that came up was that people really wanted to do an advanced sort of search right away, and Mark will show you in the demo what we came up with. The collection of record displays that included language, and by language we mean labels. You know, what do we call things? Archivists have their own language, and users often understand them. Context, when you do a search and you come up with a record, what kind of context is around, let's say, a digital object, and how does the user understand where that digital object fits into its collection and things like that. Inheritance, how to see both hierarchy and also how do you know where you are in your search with things like breadcrumbs, that kind of thing. And finally, the layout. I can say at Harvard we had a very animated discussion, and one that continues to go on about whether navigation should be on the right or left-hand side. I personally don't care. I just wanted there somewhere. I'll let the greater minds than I decide that one. And finally, utilities, things like bookmarks, citation, request access. If you're using something like Aon, how do you request material? And how do you print for those who do want to print or download a finding aid? And the last thing is customizability, and this was something we talked about a lot, was to keep the out-of-the-box design very simple but customizable, with the understanding that every repository would want to put their own imprint on the interface, the look and feel of it, and to try and leave things as customizable as possible. So now I'm going to turn it over to Mark, who's going to talk a little bit about the development and the release phase and do a demo.
Thank you, Susan. So the first thing I want to mention is just really about the development resources in the public interface project. I mean, Susan was already talking a lot about all the archivists that were involved last year during the design phase along with Cherry Hill Company. We've also had a lot of active participation, obviously, from lyricists, and the developer who was working, originally started working on this project, Brian Hoffman, started really working in November, December on the project. And he's laid a lot of the foundational work for the public interface code, which I'll show you here in the demo. And he was also on that group at Cherry Hill last year as well. The other development resources that are a lot more recent, which were just announced recently, is we actually now have, which I'm really excited to
mention again, we actually have a developer working full-time on the project that's been donated time from Harvard University. She really started at the end of May, but I think it's really officially from June through the very beginning of December, end of November, that time period. So about good 6 months of full-time work from Bobby Fox, which has been, that's been amazing. And we're also contracting, Yale's contracting Hudson Malone Glow from additional support for the interface. And I'll mention in a second what that allows us to do, which is really to set release dates finally, which is great. So we haven't actually set a release date until about the end of June, really beginning of July. We just recently announced that. So I'm not going to cover all of these ideas about the development phase, but I just want to mention, a couple of things here in terms of having a solid foundation and standards compliant architecture. I won't throw, technical terms at you, including like things like schema.org and stuff that we're really excited about putting in the public interface. The big thing I think to mention is that the decision has been made to make sure that the staff interface, archive space, and public interface are really using basically the same exact underlying stack. And so that's in the process of making that happen again, because you get a little out of sync as one develops in different time periods. It's also really important to continue those usability tests that Susan already mentioned. So usability tests will continue as the software is developed, and also after the software is released. And we at least have one lined up already, which won't even take place until actually the candidate release comes out. And I encourage and hope other folks will do usability testing on the software as well. And that would include not just, that also includes really looking at accessibility issues in the software. And so we're definitely aiming to get the new public interface, have that basically have an accessibility audit run on the software, so we can actually make a statement that this release has actually been certified against such and such standards. So we hope to have that done by the end of this calendar year. We're also looking to make sure, I think the term sensible defaults came up during the design phase, and we're carrying that over obviously into the development phase. Making sure vocab terms and really the general layout will make sense for hopefully 80% or more people who implement the tool. And we'll also have instructions for folks who want to deviate from those sensible defaults for various reasons or just for their own custom data. And again, corresponding with that, we also want to make sure that it is very easily customizable in different areas. That was a lot of the things we heard during the design phase for the public interface. The current public interface is quite customizable, and we've seen a lot of examples, but it didn't really come out of the box with tuning instructions on how to do that. And there's a few other, even lower barrier ways we're going to make that even more customizable with the next version. We also are very conscious to make sure that there's a seamless upgrade for folks using archive space to be going from one public interface to the new public interface. And why that's really important to me is looking around back in May, I found that there's already about over 30 sites using the archive space public interface, and many of those folks are generally more from smaller institutions, but the fact that they're already using it, we want to make sure that they can easily upgrade to the next release when that comes out. So this brings us to what I'm almost most excited about. Again, to reiterate, this came out of a recent announcement. I hope that you actually maybe send it out more widely. I'm not actually sure if it was sent to CMTRC or not. I think it might have been through Christine at Lyrasis. But basically, yeah, we have release dates now, which is the most promising thing, I think, even more so than a demo. December 16th, that's when we aim to have candidate release out, at least by that date, no later. And hopefully we'll have a good community testing period up through first couple of months in 2017. And we're aiming, and this tentatively based on feedback, et cetera, we're aiming hopefully to have released in March of 2017, official release of the new public interface of archive space. So I'm not going to go to the live demo. I'm going to actually do screenshots since we're over time quite a bit already. Yeah, I think we're 8 minutes, but I think the recording looks like it's still going. So this is just a couple of screenshots of the new actual code that's running right now of the archive space public interface. This is just a screenshot of a finding aid view here. This is the top level of description. We know a few things. Well, this is actually something very similar. Maybe it's a little washed out to the current public interface, but the primary navigation is not going to look much different. But we're hoping to make sure that, again, sensible defaults and the way software program will work even easier for folks. So if you're installing and you only have one repository, the idea would be the repository facet or navigation would not need to show up. It's only going to show up if you have 2 or more repositories. There's also a couple changes. Accessions is no longer called accessions. It's actually going to be called unprocessed materials, and that could be resource records or accessions. That came out of the design group discussions last year. We'll go into all of the others. Another thing that really came out of the design phase was to really try to pull up a lot of the information. A lot of things really pushed below the scroll in web terms. With the current public interface, I wanted to make sure that almost all, if not all, we're aiming to have all of the DAC single level minimum required elements to display at the top of every finding aid. So these are where actually you'll see here that most of them were displaying that. Another thing to mention, which I'm excited about with the new public interface, are some of these context-sensitive buttons that will allow you to do different things. In this case, there's a button here for citation. You can also add this finding aids to look back, basically, allowing folks to create their own finding aids based on what they find in the repository. They can print either the finding aid or the page, and there'll also be the ability to request that material depending on how it's configured, where you're going to be able to request either any level of description and request multiple aggregations of things, or maybe it's be lower level descriptions depending on how you want to configure that when they go to the implementation phase, or actually implementing the new public interface. You won't really be able to see this, but at the very bottom of the screen, this gets into that additional information section. Actually, this is a creator element. That's actually something DAX, which I think we'll probably wind back up higher up in the page once development is done. This is really still going off of current wireframes. But you see here, if you click then on Vincent Price, that would take you to a search in the specific archive space public interface. And the only thing I really want to quickly mention here, all of these things aren't done yet. The search results, you'll notice, are different in the current public interface. It's no longer just showing a title, a hyperlink title, and that's it. There's going to be more contextual information. The one bit of contextual information still missing here are the repositories. So one of these Vincent Price papers is manuscripts and archives at Yale University, since Vincent Price was an alumnus of Yale. And the other is a collection that's at the Library of Congress. So this is actually just another window into our test corpus that we're working with to test the data as we continue to develop the public interface. And I also show this because it's kind of like basically this would be almost like our EAC CPF view and archive space. So that's still developing and will develop as archive space develops with EAC CPF. We're over quite a bit, so I don't think I have time to go into a real live demo, but I wanted to send a quick thanks to at least all the people that I've listed so far that have contributed to this project. There's actually more than this, but thanks to everyone who has contributed. All of every ounce of contribution has been amazing to the project so far, and we're still very excited, obviously, feedback on this. And I did mention, and many more folks have been contributing. I did mention we're going to send out, I was actually going to share this here today, but we need to do a little bit more prep work to move our test corpus from one server to another. We're updating the public interface code. There is a link to where you can get that code now. I would say wait a couple weeks until we get some of that code ported over. But this test site it'll be up before September, so at least by September I'll send out information about how you can access that test site on your own to basically do your own kind of demo and play with the data that's in the new archive space interface. But again, the actual really candidate release is not expected until December 16th. So that's all I had.
We have about 15 minutes for questions. Does anybody have any questions? Really?
Everybody's hungry.
Oh, everybody's hungry. Well, Rachel's here. Rachel, if there's no questions, Rachel, our council liaison, is here to give a few announcements that we weren't able to get at the beginning. Questions going?
Really, no questions.
Okay.
Thanks for letting me be tardy. First of all, since this is perhaps one of the first events that you all attended at this annual meeting, welcome, and thanks for the great presentations. And I also want to say thanks to the leadership of this roundtable. You all are great to work with, so really appreciate your work. You probably will hear a series of announcements from council liaisons at different meetings that you go to, and so I will save the ones that aren't super pertinent to this group. But the big thing that will affect every single one of the sections of roundtables that you move to, that you belong to, is that we are really moving forward now with making changes to the sections and roundtables, and there's more details out about that. the biggest thing is we're basically folding them into one concept, most likely to be called sections. Not a lot otherwise will change. You can belong to as many as you'd like. You can still start new ones. If you're not doing anything anymore, yours will go away, but we won't kill you off. So if you have questions about that, ask me, ask any of the other council members that are around. We'd be happy to give you more details. There is a council working group that's going to be working on the exact details, and that's probably going to scale in over the coming year. The other thing that's going on as part of President McGovern's incoming year of being president of SAA is that there is going to be a scan of metadata and digital practices kind of amongst the various different groups. So that might have some impact on this roundtable. That group may come to you all to talk about that a bit, or you may hear about that in other sections that you belong to that do work with metadata and digital collection work. So, any questions for me about society? Okay, thank you all for being here.